Hi guys, I wanted to record some supplementary videos for you guys to be able to kind of pick up on some of the idiosyncrasies of JavaScript and coding in general as we go along. Keep in mind that a large majority of the rules that apply to JavaScript will apply to your future programming. And I really want to get you through this course well, so I'm just going to go through things really detailed. If you find that I'm going too slow for you, maybe find a way to speed up the video or kind of skip forward a little bit. But don't skip too far because there are these little pieces that are underlying JavaScript that I'm going to try to get to that are going to be very useful for you as time goes on. So what I'm going to do is probably build little bits at a time of the of a script from the beginning to the end. I'm going to start with something very simple, and I'm going to keep building on it and building on it and building on it and changing it as it goes. It's not going to be the same thing at the end at all, but it's just a way of kind of seeing all the connections between things as we go too. So if you find you really understand things as you go, you can kind of scrub along the video and find a place where it goes, wait a minute, I don't know what that code means, and maybe backtrack a little bit from there, and that will help you out a little bit too. So I'm sorry if this goes a little too slow, but this is for everybody to be able to really get it, you know? All right, so the first thing I've done is I've created an HTML file and here I'm just going to open up a separate window for a moment and pull it over for you. I created an HTML file and a JavaScript file, and I've placed them in the same folder. I've called the folder on mine Intro Recording, and you can see I have Intro HTML and Intro JS, and they're in the same folder. For I think most of your labs, you will always have these your two files, lab 1, lab 2, whatever the case might be, in the same folder. So that's kind of important. Where it is going to affect what you put in your script tag. And that's what we're going to do first. So we have intro.html and intro.js in there. We're looking at intro.js on my notepad screen, and intro.html is right here. The first thing you want to do anytime you start a project that is a web page with JavaScript is make sure that there is a script tag that points to the JavaScript file. Ideally, you want to make sure it loads at the right time. To start with, you'll always put it in the head tag, and you can just kind of assume that that's the right way to do it for now. Later on, you'll learn that you might want to put it at the bottom of your body tag, and at that time it'll matter, and at that time you'll learn why that is. For now, just accept that this is where it is to put it, and we can do a little bit of kind of catching up as time goes on. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm putting in a script tag, and we can open and close it. And I'm going to give it a source attribute. The word attribute refers to these funny words with equals and quotes and the values that comes with it. So you have a source attribute src, and we're sourcing it to intro.js. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control S for save, and that saves my intro.html. And then we're going to slip back over to intro.js. And I'm going to hit save on that too because I hit enter a couple of times. And you'll see that the first thing, go back to intro.html, run, launch in Firefox, and you see nothing happens. It's just a blank page. That's where we're starting from. First, let's talk about a way to get feedback to know that your program is working. You're going to use an alert function. So we'll write a one-line function. We write alert and a semicolon. Whenever we finish a statement, we put a semicolon. An alert is something that's built into the window that the HTML file is running in. So when I hit alert just like that, I'm going to go over and hit refresh on the page. You see that it gives us a message box dialog. I'm going to click OK. That dismisses that, and that's all that's happened. Now, when I refresh the page, that runs. Why is that? Because it's not wrapped in a function. Functions are run when you call the function name. Alert itself is a function. Scripts are run as soon as they're read. So as soon as we get to this part of script, the compiler goes through each line. It sees these comments and says, no, I don't want anything to do with the comments. Then it gets to this alert and says, oh, I have to pop up an alert, but it says nothing, so we'll just give them a blank alert. If we wanted to say something, we say, for example, this is an alert. Now I put the quotes because that's how you tell the compiler that you're giving it text data. Otherwise, it could mistake it for a bunch of variables and you've mistyped it and so on and so forth. If you want it to say text, surround it in quotes at all times. All right, so I've saved that and I'm going to refresh again, and you notice that I get this as an alert in that pop-up dialog. Pop-up dialogs are not the same for every browser, but you will get a pop-up dialog that says the message in your browser. You know, in Google, it's going to look a little bit different. In Google Chrome, it's going to look a little different. Same thing in IE. All right. So what we're looking at there is a string literal. Now, literal means that you typed it in exactly. You're not going to change it. It's constant. It's exactly as you typed it inside the script. This is useful for things like titles. You know, for example, I'm going to use alert, and we're going to call this the Introduction to JavaScript. So now I'm putting my title out there, and it's useful for me to have that Introduction to JavaScript. But let's suppose maybe that's going to change every time I do a lesson. I'm going to say var. Now I'm declaring a variable. Whenever you're declaring a variable, it's a spot in memory that can hold data. Now the data might be different types, and we'll go over that part later, but for now let's just say it's a spot in memory reserved for you to hold data, and you give it a name so that you can refer back to it several times during your program. So here I'm going to say var title equals, and I'm going to just pull that out of here. I'm going to say I want that literal value to be title, and I might later on change it to, for example, chapter 2 is working with data. So I might change the title to working with data when we get to that part. For now, let's just put alert title. And you'll notice nothing has changed in the way the program works. I saved it, by the way. I keep pressing Control S automatically. So I'm going to hit refresh, and you see it still says Introduction to JavaScript. And if you want to put two strings together, strings are text data, then you put another string here. So we'll go title. We know for a fact that we're not going to change the word title from time to time, but we might change the word, the variable title. But we have string literal and another string being added together with this plus sign. And when you add together strings, it's called concatenation. So I'm going to say in a comment, which actually is not executable code, it's just something that I'm saying to myself or communicating with other programmers in this script on. I'm going to say concatenate title with the title variable. Oh, and I guess we got to point out and show the user a message with that information. So I'm going to save that again. You see it's red when I haven't saved it in Notepad++ yet. So I'm going to go save there, and I hit F5 to refresh, and now you see it says title, space, Introduction to JavaScript. The space is actually an important point here. If you were to put no space there, it would mash it together, like so. So you see how it's all mashed together. If you want a space, you have to specify a space specifically. It's not like Google where it'll fill in the blanks for you. Google, in fact, probably coded something to watch for these things and specifically pull them apart and so on and so forth. I've also noticed in here, I've got a spelling error. I've never spelt it with a capital S, but apparently that's how you spell JavaScript. Oh well. It doesn't like that I put file name there. I like using Notepad to fix my spelling errors, but it's not really the most important part of our lesson here. All right, so what you've had a look at now is what is a string literal, what is a variable, how to add together two string literals, or a string literal and a string variable. When you're adding together string data, it concatenates it. That's what it's called when it glues it together into one string. You've learned about the alert function. This is really good for feedback while you're coding. Today's coding practices are kind of leading away from the alert box to a little bit more sliding, really nice looking stuff. And you'll learn that when you get to jQuery. But for now, alerts are really good for you to learn what you're doing as you go along. Use alerts frequently to help you figure out what you need to do. Now, it's kind of annoying that we see the title come up right away before the page loads and we get all these pop-ups. If I put a whole bunch of alerts in a row and we just went bum, 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 the user would typically get really annoyed by this. However, as you're coding, you might like to have a lot of alerts telling you what's happening as you're going so you can debug your code. It's up to you how you do that, but what we're going to do now is, aside from the title, everything else we're going to wrap in a function so that we can, instead of letting it all run as soon as the page loads, we can use a button to call that function. And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment too. But first, let's declare a function. A function is a block of code that groups together statements to perform a common action. In this course, functions are usually going to be called by clicking on a button somewhere on an HTML page. So to declare a function, we type the word function, followed by a function name. So I'm going to call this, just for now, my function, because that's what our example is. And then you have brackets, round brackets, which are where you would normally keep arguments. Let's worry about arguments later. For now, just realize that you have to put the circle brackets in there. Then you follow that with an opening curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. Whenever you declare a function, I highly recommend that you fill in all those brackets before you start putting stuff in between them. Put function, a function name, and then the curly brackets. Now, for the sake of demonstration, I am going to put a few spaces in between those curly brackets, and I'm going to put in alert, and my function was used. Now remember, I'm always putting that semicolon at the end of every statement. However, for a function, the closing curly bracket will suffice because it's using the curly brackets to define a code block. Now, a block of code is just a group of statements in a row. And you can have blocks within blocks, but that, again, that's something we're going to learn about later. So for now, realize that it can be just a set of common functions used to do, I guess, a larger task, or a group of functions made to handle a larger task. All right, so I'm moving really, really slowly here. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to cut this out a little bit for you, and we'll move on to the next lesson in just a moment. Let me show you how to call this function, and then we'll move. I'll cut this off, and we'll start a second recording. All right, so I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go into HTML. And now that we're going to be working in both files, I'm going to move my JavaScript to a split view. So I right-click on the title of the file I want to do. I go move to other view. This is just a Notepad++ thing. I also like it to be stacked from top to bottom, not left to right. So on this little middle line, I right-click and I go rotate to the right, and it kind of rotates it like a clock so that it goes on the bottom. All right, so now I can see both files, and in the HTML file, I say input type equals button. You can say type equals submit to, but that doesn't work quite as nicely for what we're doing. So type equals button is good right now. And we're going to give it an ID, which we will not use right now, but we will be using in the future. And I'm going to call this ID, just for now, my button. That is our way of referring back to the button in code later on. And then we're going to give it an on-click attribute. Remember, I said the word attribute earlier on. Type is an attribute, ID is an attribute, on-click is an attribute. And the values that we're putting in them are not attributes, they're the values of the attributes. So here I'm going to say on-click, and I'm going to fill that in just a moment. And I'm going to give it a value. The value in inputs is the text that it displays. So I'm going to just put my button here, and you'll see what it means in just a minute. When I refresh, Introduction to JavaScript comes up like before. But you notice the other alert did not come up. My function was used. Because it's wrapped inside a function which is made for being called later. You'll see that my button is the text that shows inside the button in the HTML page. Right now, when I click it, nothing happens because I did not fill in the on-click value. Now, I'm going to fill in that on-click value with the my function call. And you got to bring the brackets with it. When you go on-click, it's telling it to do some JavaScript. If I don't put the brackets, and I hit refresh. Some browsers will let it work, other browsers will not. I clicked it, nothing's happening again because it doesn't like it. There's actually an error in there, which you can't really see. I'm going to look at the console right now. When I click that, nothing happens in the console either. But when I do the double brackets as it likes, that's how you say that I am calling a function. I'm asking it to do work. And it also is a way to pass in arguments later on, but right now we're not passing in any arguments, so don't worry about it. However, that's sort of why they chose brackets to define calling a function, because sometimes when you call a function, you're passing information and the brackets allow you to do that. All right, so I'm going to refresh again. Again, we get the title, so we know we're refreshing. I think I like the title to be out there. I'm going to leave it out there in the JavaScript throughout, for a while anyway, so that we know that we've finished clicking refresh. And when I click OK, you have noticed, by the way, that the rest of the HTML page hasn't loaded in the background. When I click OK, my button finally shows up. That's because of the order of compiling. It compiles it here before it ever gets to the body. Now, if I move this script tag down right at the bottom of the body, just after the no script or just before the no script tag. Actually, I'll put it afterwards. When I refresh, you notice that the My Button shows up and the pop-up comes up. So you can see the order of loading the script and loading the elements on the HTML page. So the body's fully loaded when you do it this way. And that will be important when you do jQuery in a future course. So I clicked OK. Now when I click my button, remember we've taken my function and we put it into the onClick attribute, which now says when I click my button, my function was used, which is what we had here, the alert that says my function was used. So my button has run my function because I have my function with brackets, and here it's called my function with brackets. Function my function. And that's in my onClick method. There's not a whole lot more to this particular lesson, so I'm going to stop it, I'm going to save it, and I'm going to move on to the next part.